And I am super excited to welcome Dr. Tracey Gendron, I got it
You
right,
got it right.
um, who is the author of Ageism Unmasked. And ageism is one of those discussions that is just so thought provoking and eye opening. And I always love the discussions that we have around ageism. So it's fantastic to have an author who wrote on this topic because you've clearly put a lot of deep thinking into this very important topic to put your book together. But before we dive into the book, let's get to know you a little bit better. Tracey, tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to your career path.
Yeah, well, first, thank you for having me here. I so appreciate the opportunity. And for all of you that have joined us, I'm really glad that you're here. I really love talking about ageism because it's a really important topic, and I would love to see comments and questions in the chat. I think the more interactive this discussion is, the better, because honestly, we're kind of all on our own path when it comes to recognizing it, when it comes to seeing it. I'm a gerontologist. I've been a gerontologist for about 25 years. And I really didn't start to think about or study ageism really deeply until about 10 years ago. And it was kind of an aha moment that I had where I was describing to somebody why I became a gerontologist. And it was basically because, as I said at the time, I wanted to have all of this knowledge so I could best serve the aging population. And that's why I went to school, and that's why I became a gerontologist, and that's what I wanted to do. So all of a sudden, it kind of dawned on me that when I was talking about the aging population, what I meant was older people. And I had this aha moment of why am I disassociating myself from someone that's aging? And that was it. It was like a light bulb moment went on, and I was like, ageism. That's why it's ageism. It's about othering older people, those older people, and putting myself in a different category. And that's when I really set out on a path to fully, deeply understand it. And I'm still learning because it's so nuanced and it's so complicated and it's so invisible and it's so ubiquitous. It's everywhere and in everything we do. So as I've learned, it took me years of kind of thinking this through and figuring out how I wanted to write this book. But then kind of figured maybe walking through time to understand how we got to this moment, how we got to today, there was going to be some power in that for me so that I could really more fully understand what got us here.
I
So
love
now
it.
it's a topic I just love talking about.
Yeah, me too. I really do. And I think one of the things ageism, when you sort of compare it to, let's say, sexism or racism, the in general, what I've found is that most issues of ageism are not necessarily intentional, and that's one of the best things about the discussion of ageism. It's usually we're just making mistakes and we just didn't think about it because we don't, unlike sexism or racism, we all hope to someday be in the category of older adult, if we even should have a category that's called that. So um
Yeah, I think
uh
that speaks to the invisibility of it for sure. And I think when you address any form of discrimination, ultimately you're elevating all forms, right? In other words, awareness of all forms. So by talking about racism, by talking about sexism and ageism, together we're like all boats rise. We're lifting everything up and we're raising awareness of all of it.
Great. Well, not surprised. The comments and the questions are already kind of coming in fast and
Keep them
furious.
coming.
But let's what I want to do, because we had a lot of success last month when we had a book author on. What really seemed to work great for a discussion topic is to sort of walk through the organization of the book that we're talking about, and have our author kind of share some thoughts, and then we spice that up with some audience questions, comments, what have you. So on the screen, what you see is Tracey's book, Ageism Unmasked, and then I've got the headers for all the chapters there. So Tracey, I'll let you kind of drive the bus here and maybe kick things off with chapter one and tell us kind of some of the thoughts that you are uncovering there in that chapter.
I absolutely will. And of course, I could talk for hours and hours about each chapter. So I will try my best just to kind of create a little short synopsis of each one, something that we can dig into. Chapter one really started for me because I would often get the question, didn't we used to revere elders? And the answer to that was both yes and no. So what I realized was that ageism is really complicated, and it's been complicated from the very beginning, ultimately because aging itself is really complicated. And it's hard to wrap your head around something that has both elements of growth and decline, but aging has both of those. What we're most familiar with is how our bodies change over time. And we tend to really talk about that because I think we relate to each other that way. I can't do this the way I used to do this. And, I can relate to you because we both experienced that. But what we talk about less frequently is how we grow over time, socially, psychologically, and spiritually. So when I really went back to look at the beginning, and I found there are all of these wonderful references to how we revered elders, in all kinds of ancient cultures and all kinds of religions. But at the same time, there was also really early references to aging as a disease and to fighting wrinkles. I mean, all the way back to ancient Egypt, we're seeing both of these kind of sentiments at the same time. So it was interesting to me to understand the complexity that has always been there. There's certainly things that have happened over time that I talk about in the other chapters that have contributed to where we are right now today. But kind of having that starting point of it's always been kind of a mixed bag of there's, positive and negative elements was helpful for me to just kind of wrap my head around that this isn't something necessarily newly created. We've always struggled with this idea of aging as two different things.
Yeah, no, that great thoughts there. And uh, I'm just listening to you and glancing at chat. And Marianne says, "I ordered the book on Amazon. It came yesterday, and I can't put it down." So what a great opportunity, Marianne, to order a book, and now we get to kind of be walked through the chapters by the author. Let's see. Mary Busey says, "We're lucky if we get old." And yeah, I mean, it's because the alternative is that you're not walking the planet anymore. And
Yes.
that's
And
not what.
let's take back the value. Let's be old and be
Mhm.
proud of that.
Yeah. And let's see. The Anne says, Ann Heiser says, we can change the way we age at any age.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that I heard a speaker talk on the topic of ageism once, and I quote her often. I wish I remembered who said this, but aging begins on the delivery room table, not with an AARP card.
Yeah.
And we can change for the we can choose to change to improve our lives at any age in our lifespan. This whole notion of you can't teach old dogs new tricks is, a fallacy. Is that if somebody is motivated and they want to make a change for the better, age is not something that's in their way.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. I like to ask people who in this room, either this virtual room or when I'm in a space with people, who is not aging. And of course,
Right.
everybody laughs because it's like, there's no such thing. We're all aging all of the
Yep.
time. This isn't about older people. This is about all of us.
So let me just run through a couple of the questions that have come in, and then we'll dive into chapter two, the era
Sure.
of technology and medicine. Audra says, what do you think of the progressive commercial that says something like "Don't become your parents"?
Uh,
It, and it's fun. It's funny. I will say, like when I'm in a movie theater and there's an very blatant ageist joke and I laugh, I sometimes feel guilty. I mean, the progressive commercials are funny, but they are just feeding an ageist mindset.
Exactly. And you know, it's that fine line between what's funny and then what propels oppression and marginalization. And I think we need to kind of recalibrate how we think about that. And yeah, marketing is going to lean into all of that, but in part realize that marketers like to kind of feed into fear because fear drives sales. And I know that that's kind of in a later chapter here, but they almost want us to feel that sense of, you know, shame and discomfort with it because it makes us buy more products. I don't want to become like my parents. I guess I need this certain product then, or this certain service. So that's a form of manipulation, I think, that we kind of need to open our eyes to.
Great. Okay, let's dive into, I'll get those other questions there. Let's dive into chapter 2, Era of Technology in Medicine.
Yeah, so when we go back to the Industrial Revolution, and I'll try and sum this up really quickly, we see that there were actually some really pivotal things that happened at that time that really kind of forked us in the road towards a very ageist culture. First, we saw like families kind of separating because people started to move into the cities and away from their family homes. That was the Industrial Revolution. We started to value productivity and mobility and efficiency. And with all of those buzzwords, we started to see people disparaging older people, people starting to say that older people didn't have the same value as before. So I think there was a real fork in the road that happened there, where we started to see language evolve and started to see more kind of disparaging remarks about older people. At the same time, the landscape for caregiving also changed. And we started to talk about childhood differently because children were no longer working on farms. They were now in a protected state of being nurtured. And we started to pick apart parenting from caregiving. So parenting was our responsibility to raise our children, and it had both challenges and rewards. Caregiving became more later associated with a burden about caring for older people. So even though caregiving is also across the lifespan, we started to push older people into this different category of now it's a burden to care for your elders instead of expected. And that's when we started to see more institutional care come up, where you would take your older family member out of your home, you know, and put them into institutions. That started at that phase as well. So it was things like that that really happened. And then it was the biomedical model of aging, which basically looks at symptoms as disease and as health as the absence of disease. When we started to see aging as a disease and something to be treated. And then that gave rise to tremendous ageism within the whole healthcare system that we still see today.
Yeah, and this feeds into a question or a comment that Jose Ramos brought up, and he says, "How has ageism contributed to the growth of the long-term care industry, which is now 511 billion and growing 5% every year?" It's really good observation there, Jose, and that feeds into what you just shared.
It does. And I'll say this, there are really important reasons to have a long-term care industry. And there's many, many people that benefit from it. And there's many, many people that give their heart and soul to the work they put in. But again, the thought that we have an industry that kind of uses older people as the commodity, I think says a lot. And we did start to move in that direction. We physically started building walls to segregate older people and people with different abilities. So to me, that's what I talk about, the twins, ageism and ableism.
Which is chapter 3. Great segue.
Yep, that's how that all kind of comes together. Yeah. So we start to devalue people that are not only differently aged, but that we see as differently abled. And in that chapter, I particularly talk about that in the workspace and how the era of social benefits and retirement policies and pensions really moved us in that direction. But also in here, when you're talking about ageism and ableism at work, I have to talk about my feelings about generational rhetoric, because I think that that's actually a really big feeder of ageism in a way that we have yet to really embrace. I'm personally not a fan of generational labels. To me, they don't really make a whole lot of sense because you're taking people that are within a 25-year span sometimes and assuming that they have the same characteristics, the same behaviors, the same wants, the same needs. And that just doesn't make any logical sense. So these labels make us stereotype, which leads to prejudice, which leads to discrimination. And I mean that for all ages. We can look at, younger people who we always call millennials, whether they are or not, as being entitled or being lazy. And there's countless millennials that are, beautiful, wonderful contributors who are actually out there supporting elders, that are doing caregiving. And yet we lump them all into this group. So I think when you see ageism and ableism at work, a lot of it is this manufactured generational tension, right? How do you have a workplace for 5 generations? Well, how do you see the unique person that's in front of you instead of labeling them by their generation? So I get into some of that in chapter 3. And I think that's one of the things to me that makes ageism and ableism applicable to everybody. Again, this is not older people. This is all of us.
Now, Arlene has a question, and it ties into that, especially in the workplace. And she says, I think women experience ageism more frequently and earlier than men. Any thoughts on that? Uh-oh. Tracey? Oh, no. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, now I can. Yeah.
Okay.
Did you hear the comment about ageism with women experiencing ageism more frequently than men?
So I didn't, but I can comment on that. And that actually is in chapter 5. So I'll just skip ahead to that for a minute. I think, yes, men and women, although I like to talk about it as masculinity and femininity, they definitely experience ageism differently. But I think it is important that we recognize that both do experience ageism. So I think many women will feel it not only about shame about appearance. It's like I've heard older women say they feel hyper visible and invisible all at the same time. So I'm going to pick apart your appearance. I'm going to judge you because you have wrinkles. And then at work, I'm going to pass you over for a promotion, or I'm not going to hire you. I think those are very, unique things that a lot of women experience. But I think when we talk about men or masculinity, we can also really look at what's the number one product that is targeted to older men, probably for low testosterone. Well, what's the message behind that? That your worth is tied up in virility and potency. There's a lot of advertising towards men about being a masculine man and what that means about caregiving. And there's a lot to pick apart there as well. So I think it does affect all people just differently in different ways.
Yeah, no, great comment and great feedback on that. Let's jump back to chapter 4, which is retirement as a life stage and successful aging.
Yeah, I love this topic. So, in the 1950s, when we started to build retirement communities, I really see that as being integral to kind of age segregation in a new way. So then we started like brick by brick building and segregating older people, 55 and older communities and all of that. Again, if that works for you, I think that's fine. But I think that we started to associate retirement with a lifestyle and retirement with a life stage. At that same time, in my own discipline, we started to talk about this concept called successful aging. And successful aging was actually meant to push against ageism by saying that older people can be successful if they remain engaged, if they remain physically fit, and if they remain cognitively intact. And I get it. I understand at the time what they were trying to do. But unfortunately, that really trips us into that intersection of ageism and ableism yet again. Because if you are going to define successful aging that way, eventually we will all fail. We are mortal beings and we do decline, and decline is a part of aging. And we can be successful whether we have physical abilities or not, where we have cognitive abilities or not. You can find joy if you know where to look. You can find success. So I think those two things at the same time created this view of older adulthood as retirement, as withdrawal, and almost as super agers and the people who are running marathons and jumping out of airplanes as the ideal. And it really left out most people. So, I think we created this really gaping hole there, and it led us to not fully understand what older adulthood could be, maybe what some specific markers or milestones are in older age. And that's why I like to talk about it in terms of elderhood, which we'll get to. That's more strengths-based to me. But, retirement, when somebody reintroduces themselves and says they're retired, what does that tell me about them? It tells me that they used to work full time. That's all it tells me. It doesn't really tell me who they are, different forms of their identity, what their goals are, what interests them. And yet we now use this concept of retirement to really define older adulthood. And I find that to be lacking.
And we had somebody ask, what would you call it instead of successful aging?
I think you define your own success. So I don't think like to call it successful aging is okay, as long as we have the power to not feel shamed or pigeonholed in to what a narrow definition of success is. Success can mean anything. Success could mean that you just have joy and happiness in your day. It doesn't have to be pinned upon something that you actually have no control over, and something that it could be classist or racist or, all kinds of other ists, because you don't have access to certain things that other people have access to things too. So define it for yourself. You decide what success is.
And I like your thoughts, as do a lot of the people in chat, on this age segregation in senior living communities. And I totally agree, but I always remind people it's sort of, okay, the only legal form of housing segregation now is that you can create a community where young people can't live.
Yes.
Now, the good thing about that is that the reason these communities were created is to take care of older adults instead of, the other forms of housing segregation that we've had in our history. That being said, if we can come up with a solution where we don't have age segregated housing, where we can take care of our elders in an intergenerational manner, wouldn't that be wonderful? But
yeah,
that'll be for another discussion.
Absolutely. It sure would. But it is important to keep in mind, one of the best ways to combat ageism is to have differently aged people spend time together.
Exactly.
So, and most older people want to continue to live in their homes and in their communities and be part of intergenerational relationships. So we've built structures to make that not happen.
Yep.
And that is definitely something to think about.
Yeah, no, it's great. Okay, let's dive into chapter 6, I think is what we're on, the misinformation age.
Chapter 5 first.
Chapter 5. Oh, the era of yeah. I can't skip that one. The era of manipulation, anti-aging culture.
Yeah, we can't miss that. So the anti-aging culture, to me, it represents both anti-aging medicine and the anti-aging industry in terms of cosmetics and supplements and products. And that really started in earnest in like the 1980s, where we started to see this visible movement that started to use almost militaristic language talking about aging. So that's when we started to get into the battle against aging, the fight against aging, and really all of those deep messages that are now so pervasive that really equate it with just the biological aspects of aging, and saying that wrinkles aren't beautiful, saying that older bodies aren't beautiful. And that's been really powerful. For the record, I have no issues. I don't judge anybody who wants to dye their hair, use makeup, get procedures, have at it. If that's what makes you feel good, if that's what makes you feel beautiful, I think we should all be driven by the things that make us feel good. Where I take issue is that we're being led because of shame. We're being taught to shame, to feel shame, that we need to cover ourselves up, that we need to literally mask ourselves. This is one of the reasons I call this ageism unmasked, because the anti-aging culture has told us that we need to physically put a mask on to look like a younger version of ourselves. And I want us to take those masks off and reclaim our power at all ages and at all stages. So, I think that was a really influential time. And it's funny because there's so much cognitive dissonance in it as well. I'll give you an example. I don't know if any of you saw, it was 2017, and then I think again in 2019, Allure magazine came out with a big headline that said an end to anti-aging. And they said they weren't going to use this language anymore, and they were going to take a stand. And I was like, this is amazing. I can't wait to look at this magazine. So I got it and I flipped to page 3, literally to page 3. And what was on page 3? An ad for anti-wrinkle cream. And it was like, we don't get it. We just don't quite get it. So, there's also like this dissonance that's out there, that we think we're being anti-ageist by saying, okay, I get that this language is not good, but not fully understanding what that means. And so I write about that in that chapter as well, that's how complicated ageism is. It's like hard to wrap your head around both of these things.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that very magazine, by taking that stance, is now attracting advertisers that want to promote these services. So it's crazy. Okay, now we get to chapter 6, the misinformation age.
Yes. So this is where we start to talk about the rise in technology. And I'm sure that all of you have had many of these conversations about these myths of older people not wanting to interact with technology, not having the capacity to interact with technology. And we know that that's not true. We know that sometimes it may take somebody that's older a little bit longer to understand because they didn't have this when they were younger, but they are quite willing, quite capable. And in fact, most older adults willingly and happily interact with technology. But what I found fascinating when I was exploring into this is kind of recognizing how the system is built to support younger people and technology and not older people. So there's a great TED Talk by Kathy O'Neill, and she basically says that algorithms are opinion embedded in code. So the people that are writing the algorithms, the people that are doing the data mining, that is really what serves to show us content and data and information, they're basing it on information that largely doesn't include the voices and opinions of older people. Or if it does, a very homogenous set of older people. So the tech industry itself is pretty ageist, and we've seen this. They tend to hire young people. There tend to be more age discrimination cases at work in the tech industry because they notoriously want people in their 20s and 30s in and not older people. And they don't include the voices of older people in development and research. So it means that we are creating technology for older people that doesn't have input of older people. And that is a problem. So when we talk about things like the digital divide, we also have to realize this is not just about access. This is not just about competency. This is about the fact that the whole industry has really leaned in to looking at what they think older people might need or want without asking older people what they might need or want. And that was truly eye-opening for me. So I felt like it's easy to see when we talk about social isolation, which I talk about in that chapter, and technology, why older people may be more at risk for social isolation, where we have built a society that is built on ageism, that systematically excludes them from everything. So of course you're going to feel socially isolated when you feel as if your voice doesn't matter, if you feel if things are being built for you without asking you. And so that was just a really fascinating chapter for me to learn more about and for me to dig into.
Yeah, and I was able to find that that TED Talk and drop it into chat there, folks, so you can uh, watch that at your leisure. Okay, chapter 7, the era of a global pandemic, something that we hope we never return to.
Yeah, wow. And I'm sure everybody in some ways is sick of talking about the global pandemic, but for me, this is actually one of the prompts for me to write the book. So in March 2020, when things first really started to elevate and we all saw rampant ageism in so many different ways, that this was an old person's disease. This was something that we didn't really need to care about. This was, we should sacrifice older people for the sake of the economy. We saw terrible like hashtags, boomer remover, things that were floating around social media that were just completely devaluing older people. And then at the same time, we also saw that generational rhetoric. So we saw stories of, again, quote, millennials who weren't millennials, they were Gen Z, ignoring masking mandates, going to the beach, as if all younger people were doing that, when meanwhile, there were plenty of younger people that were out there supporting older people who were wearing their masks. Again, we just kind of got into this rhetoric. And that was a moment for me that's when I realized how I wanted to write this book and that I wanted to write this book. And then there was kind of a second piece of it during the pandemic as well. The ageism towards differently aged people was one thing, but then seeing how COVID unfolded in long-term care, seeing how we hailed people that work in hospitals as heroes, and that we didn't talk so much about all of the direct care staff and the administrators and the hundreds of thousands of people that work with and on behalf of older adults as heroes, was heartbreaking. We didn't recognize that they were putting themselves at risk every day, willingly, lovingly. And then we didn't really, start to look at some of the systematic problems that we do have in long-term care, getting into a living wage, getting into valuing people that work with older people. So again, it was another layer of ageism that was like, not only are we not valuing older people, we really systematically devalue the people that work to support them. And that was just another example of structural ageism during the pandemic that really, really spoke to me. And again, another reason why I wanted to write this. And I will say a tiny little nod to Ageism Unmasked, because unmasking was also part of the pandemic.
Mhm. Yeah, good tie in there. The okay, and the last chapter, I wanted to make sure we got through the whole book, and then we're gonna go through all the questions and comments that we've got here. But elderhood, your thoughts on that chapter?
Yeah, I I think elderhood and this concept of elderhood has a lot of power, because I see elderhood as a very strengths-based, growth-based concept. So we have stages of life, right? We have infancy, we have toddlerhood, we have adolescence, we have even young adulthood, adulthood, and then we just talk about older adulthood. And to me, that really speaks to how we see aging as a process of decline instead of aging as a process of growth. I think elderhood is qualitatively different from adulthood because it has different markers, different milestones, different roles. Another way that we get stuck in our thinking is back to that successful aging. We think that to be successful at aging, you have to maintain the roles of midlife. So it's again built on productivity and contribution economically. What if we thought of it completely differently? And we thought of, again, successful aging in elderhood as the person that wants to continue to work and does, but also as the person that is very happy in quiet solitude and reflection, as the person who wants to work on building a family legacy versus a personal legacy versus a social legacy. If we made space and room for all of these paths in elderhood, then again, it cracks open that definition of what is success. And it helps us understand that there's more growth, there's more opportunity, and there's more development after midlife, after adulthood. We keep growing. We're always growing. It just might look a little bit different. And we have yet to really understand how that can look. There's so much opportunity for research in this area. There's so much opportunity to learn from elders themselves. There's also no one like age or way that we become an elder. That's a question that I get a lot. And I ask, well, what's the age when we become an adult? Is it 18? I don't necessarily think so. Maybe for one person, but maybe not for somebody else. So I don't think we can categorize it by age either, but it's more of a developmental trajectory. It's more of just opportunity for growth. So I see a lot of power in this concept of elderhood. And imagine if we lived in a society when we looked forward to aging, if we looked forward to elderhood, if we saw ourselves all as elders in training. Someday I hope to be an elder. Imagine that, just like when we're little kids and you say, someday I hope to be an adult. I'm going to be so excited when I'm an adult. We could do that, but I think we need to kind of capture the spirit of it first. So that's kind of what I talk about in that last chapter.
I love it. Great book, and I have added some links. There was some questions about getting it, and I basically added a link from your publisher's website. So
Wonderful. Thank you.
that will hopefully be helpful to folks. Okay, so let's dive into some of these questions and
Yeah.
comments. And again, I know I tend to babble, folks. I got a few comments. I get on a tangent. I get so excited about these topics. But now I'm going to try to read your comments. So I'm the voice of the audience. This is not my voice. Okay. Um, let's see. The Jose says ageism is irrational. It is the manifestation of our prejudice to our future selves. Absolutely. Great.
Yes, it
Very well
is.
said. Um, let's see. Arlene says, when I decided to leave my job after 33 years, I got loads of people asking me what I plan to do with my life. My reply was, there's a whole world out there to experience, and I couldn't wait. Travel, theater, read, do whatever else I want to. That's great, Arlene. Chantel says, have you found, though, that as we age, we ourselves contribute to these issues? Older people making jokes about age, abilities, labeling something as a senior moment. When I ask the question, older people will typically say that they feel like they need to make light of it because aging feels so heavy to them.
Mhm.
I get this, but it's a bit dangerous. It also seems ageism exists within us even as we become older.
Oh, that's such a great point. And yeah, I'd love to comment on that. Yeah, I think in part, older people may express more internalized ageism for a couple of reasons. Number one, as you said, it's kind of you're in it and we use it as a way to kind of relate to other people. And I get that part of it. But I think it's also because, again, when you look back at the history, you've been swimming in this for a really long time. This has been the predominant narrative for your entire lifetime. So it's so deeply in there, it's so deeply ingrained that a lot of people haven't had that aha moment yet. And unfortunately, people don't yet understand fully the consequences of that internalized ageism. So I'm sure some of you know the work of Becca Levy. She has been doing this for decades, and her work is really powerful and shows that when we do internalize those negative views of aging, not only do we make ourselves sick, not only do we lose years of our lives, we put ourselves at risk for all kinds of things, from being isolated to having mental health issues, all kinds of things. So every time we make that little joke, if we are internalizing it, we're actually not only doing our damage to others, but we're doing damage to ourselves. So I think it's time to, start to raise that awareness and start to just think critically about what's funny and what's not. There's always a place for humor. I'm really a fan of humor. But again, maybe be thinking if it's driven by shame or fear of judgment from others, to recognize that everything we say is being role modeled for other people and that we're all role models for what it means to age has a lot of power.
That, that's great. I added a link to Becca Levy at Yale for those that want to learn more about her. On that front, and again, I'm editorializing here, but the progressive commercial, one thing that I often do is the progressive commercial that talks about aging. What if you replaced being parents with being black in that commercial?
Correct.
That would be blatant racism. Okay.
Correct.
And that's one of the things that I do to determine whether a message is ageist or not, is replace it with Catholic or Jewish or black. And
Yeah.
you are oftentimes shocked.
I write about
Um,
that in the book, actually. Even think of anti-aging. Would we have an anti-gender
yeah.
industry? Would we have an anti-religion? Would we have,
Yeah.
anti-anything? But we use aging like as if that's okay.
Jose, I'm going to give you the gold star today, although there's lots of great comments. But Jose asks, if ageism is so persuasive, so systematically entrenched, how are we going to get out of this? It's a great thought-provoking question.
So, and I'll answer it by saying this. When I was doing some research for creating a video on ageism, my husband and I went to a store to see how far back we could find a magazine cover or something that had like the look the 20 years younger. And I found a Ladies' Home Journal from 1959 that on the cover said, look 20 years younger. So that showed us again why some older people have so much internalized ageism, because this has been around for a long time. But right under that headline was another headline that said, and I'm not making this up, it said, help for unresponsive wives making marriage work. And this whole article was about how women, wives, have internal and external defects. Yes, they were used the word defects that may make their partners, their husbands, not happy. So after being outraged, of course, in reading this, it did give me that aha moment that in 1959, that was okay. In 1959, that was in supermarket shelves, and we changed it. We worked really, really hard, couple steps forward, couple steps back, but we changed it. So if we can change that, and we can change the way that we see gender roles and sexual identity and gender identity, then we can change this. So it just means that every person that connects with this, every person that decides to say, I am aging, and I'm going to, yell that, and to stop saying I'm 51 years young, but I'm 51 years old, and to embrace this concept of old, it means we're reaching critical mass. So each person matters, and that's how we get out of it.
Great thoughts and perspective. Tanaje McFadden, I know I didn't pronounce that name correctly, says, I think another chapter is needed. I think ageism is also tied up in our fear of death and refusal to talk openly about death and dying. Do you agree?
I completely agree. And I touch on that just a little bit in that last chapter. Yeah, fear of dying is certainly a part of it. There's actually a theory called terror management theory. And I know that this is very academic, but it's worth looking into if you're interested in that. And it basically says we want to push away the people that make us feel vulnerable to loss and death. And it is an aspect of ageism, and that certainly plays out in healthcare. So yeah, we have pathologized the death and dying process, which absolutely contributes to our fear of aging, which contributes to ageism. So it's definitely a layer that is underneath it. It's a great thought.
Okay, we got lots more questions, comments that I want to make sure that we get to here. And here's one that just came in from Kathleen Winters. The term senior is used to describe many communities, centers, etc., and it connotes to many a negative term. Is there a more inclusive or positive term? And I think referring to this stage as elderhood, I think most folks can agree that is. But your thoughts on? I think folks are. I hear this all the time. We're grappling for this label.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny, I'm not sure we'll ever find the right label as long as we're stigmatizing all of these words. So I think, I agree. I don't use the word elderly because I think it connotes a homogenous group of people that are frail, and there's much more nuance to the whole, aging spectrum, people of older adults. But seniors, older people, it's like we don't have a good word because we continue to stigmatize all of them, because we continue to want to disassociate with all of them. So maybe we need to work on that piece of it first, reclaiming old, reclaiming, that there isn't a value judgment with it. It isn't good or bad, it just is. And then once we do that, maybe we can find the right language. Language is important, but you're right. There's no one word that's like everyone's going, yes, I want to be called that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to summarize this one question that came in, and it sort of demonstrates the two sides of ageism. And what this person is talking about is, when should a geriatric physician be brought into the healthcare team? And they're talking about how they were caring for their mother and father, and they would get changed to a younger doctor who folks did not perceive as caring and as sensitive, because the older doctors who understood mom and dad were retired. Any thoughts on that? I hear this a lot, is that it's sort of like, I want this old experienced doctor, and assuming that the younger doctor may not be qualified.
Yeah, and that certainly is ageist in and of itself. I think that first, there's a critical shortage of geriatricians, and there's a critical shortage of people that are going into all of these geriatric fields. And I think that I hope that begins to change. I hope we begin to not only embed geriatrics and gerontology into more med school curriculum, but have people recognize that this is actually a very rewarding and enriching field. But I would say no matter what age someone is, if they have training in geriatrics, and they went through any kind of rotation that really got into some of the nuances of that particular branch of medicine, that would be my preference. If it were for me, if it were for a loved one, I would just want to know that somebody had an understanding of this. Somebody had an understanding of what it means to be older and what it means to treat older people. And again, both the complexities and the rewards in that process.
Great thoughts. And I just caught this chat here from Christy McCormick, who says, my 92-year-old father always tells people when we're out and about that 65 years ago he was wearing a Chicago Bears uniform. Do I just smile at that, or do you recommend saying you are just as wonderful and valuable today as you were 65 years ago? Yeah, I mean, thoughts on that?
Yeah. And if that's what we want to say, I think it's always a wonderful thing to tell people that they are valuable to us right this moment. They were then, they are now. Just to validate people's experiences and their contributions and what they mean to you, I think is always a good way to go.
Mm-hmm. Man, there's some great comments in chat that everybody can read and that I'm going to be cutting and pasting into the recording. I just want to see if there's any that jump out here as we wrap things up in the next 5 minutes or so. While I'm looking at chat, any sort of closing thoughts or things that you wanted to address, Tracey, that you may have not had the opportunity to share with the audience?
I'm sure there's like a million things that I would love to continue to talk about, but I love the opportunity to kind of give a broad overview of the book, to get some of your questions and feedback on it. I really do like to end the conversation with, what do we do now? Because I think it's great once we see it, once we see ageism, once we see ableism, and we see it fully, you're going to see it everywhere. And that's great, because I think awareness is the first step. We first need to understand how it's invisible, and then we can start to make those small steps and have those small changes so that we can move forward as a collective, and we can change this. So I'd say the first thing is start to see yourself, no matter what age, no matter what stage, as someone that is aging. Recognize that this is about you. I encourage people to find their why. So if you're going to do this, why? Why does it matter to you to get on board to disrupt ageism? Does it matter to your health and happiness? Does it matter because it's actually really bad for businesses? Does it matter because you want an equitable society? Is it all of those things? So kind of think about your why. And then start to work on what you say in the moment, how you address it in the moment. We are all going to be faced now with the person that says to us, you look great for your age, or you haven't aged a bit, or whatever those are. How do we address that in the moment? And the answer is it depends on the conversation and who it's with. But I encourage you all to start to think about that. Think about those small ways that you can like build up your skills as a role model for this. And then share that with other people, because this is about building a movement.
This is so great, and it's the chat comment that I pulled out was from Matt Thornhill, and you just addressed it. Is that so many people in our industry, in the senior living industry, use that term for her age or for his age when describing the residents of your senior living community. Oh, and we've got so many people that are doing well for their age, and we just don't realize what an ageist statement that is.
Exactly.
Okay. Jose, two more here, and then I'll wrap things up. Jose, again, with a great thought here. Let's understand just one word: intimacy. Intimacy is more than the congenial sense of the term. It comes with evolution. It's a reflection of self-worth, one's experience in another, sees another eyes and feels another's voice. Very well said.
Beautiful.
Jose, and intersects with empathy, which is very important as well. And somebody says here, the elderly are often viewed as people who are sick, frail, weak, powerless, and burdensome. Older adults are seen as people cared for by geriatricians. We need a positive view of aging as a healthy, normal part of life.
Absolutely. Beautiful.
Man. Well, folks, again, this was an excellent discussion. And Tracey, I'd love to have you back on again, and we can just keep this ball rolling. I will, as I had mentioned, this recording will be available. The chat will be available, there were so many great comments in chat. I just couldn't get through them all, but we can use this as a discussion. In fact, I'm going to see if there's a way I might be able to set up a little discussion board underneath this this recording so that we can just keep the ball rolling on this very important topic.
Would love that. Thank you so much, everyone, for all of the comments and the great discussion.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you at the next one.